In this lesson, we're going to be discussing aligning and distributing objects. If you'd like to follow along, go under the File menu to Open, and in the Sample Files folder, select 0405 Align Objects and just click Open. In order to talk about aligning objects, we really need to open the Align panel. So let's go under the Window menu to Object and Layout, Align. Now, if your Align panel looks like this, start by going under the Options menu to Show Options, so we can see all of the options in the panel. Why don't we select the 4 objects going down the left side of the page by clicking and dragging with our Selection tool to marquee the 4 objects. Why don't we start in the Align To pop-up. There's a lot of options on how to align objects. You can align to your selection that you've made. You can align to something called a key object, which we'll talk about later. You can align to the margins on your page, or align to the page itself, or align to a spread if you're working on a spread. I'm going to start by choosing Align to Selection. If I click on the first command, Align Left Edges, it's going to align the left edges of the objects to the leftmost edge of the leftmost object. I'm going to keep hitting Command Z or Control Z to undo. The next command is Align Horizontal Centers. So what that's going to do is align the centers of each one of these objects to the center of the selection. Let me click on that, and you can see that's exactly what it does. It moves objects in from both directions so that they're centered to the center of my original selection. Let's undo that. The next command is Align Right Edges, and that's going to align all of the right edges of these objects to the right side of the rightmost object. Let's undo that. To continue, why don't we click and drag across the 3 objects on the bottom of the page. And now click on the next command, which is Align Top Edges. And you can see that it aligned all of the tops of these objects to the top of the topmost object. Let me undo that. The next command is Align Vertical Centers. So it's going to align the centers of each one of these objects so that they vertically will align right across my page. Let me do that. Let's undo that and continue. Align Bottom Edges. It will align all of the bottoms of each one of these objects to the bottom of the bottommost object. To talk about the next section, Distribute Objects, why don't we select our 4 objects going down the left side of the page. And before we begin, click Align Left Edges. In the next section, which is Distribute Objects, why don't we click on that first command on the left, which is Distribute Top Edges. All of the distribute commands are something that people get confused by. And that's mainly because you can see it looks like it's making the distance between these objects exactly the same, which in this case it is. But that's not what the command is all about. Let me show you. I'm going to undo this, Command Z or Control Z, and I'm going to make my first object a lot shorter. And I'm going to make my second object taller. And my third object a lot shorter. And I'm going to reselect all of my objects. And I'm going to click that same command, which is Distribute Top Edges. And it is actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The top edges of each one of these objects is exactly the same. So the distance from the top edge of this object to the top edge of this object is equal to the top edge of this object to the top edge of this object, and so on. My question is, when would I ever use this in a layout? I've been using InDesign for a long time, and I've never used any of the distribute commands. So if you come up with a use for the distribute commands, I would love to hear from you. Why don't we go to the next section, which is Distribute Spacing. I'm going to start by temporarily unchecking Use Spacing. And I'm just going to click on Distribute Vertical Space. What that's going to do is make the space between each one of these objects equal. Let me select my objects going across the bottom of my page and click on Distribute Horizontal Space. Well, that's going to make the space between the objects going across the page equal. Now, what is use spacing? Let me check that. I've already typed in 0.25 inches. You can do the same. I'm going to click on the Distribute Horizontal Space command. And you can see it's moving all of the objects together so that there's a 1/4 inch of space between the objects. Let me do the same thing going up and down my page with the objects on the left. And I'm going to click Distribute Vertical Spacing. Oh, but it didn't do what I wanted. I wanted them to distribute to the bottom object. I wanted that to stay where it was, and it's not doing it. Let me undo this, Command or Control Z. And I'm going to go back to my Align To pop-up menu and choose a new way of aligning objects in InDesign called Align to Key Object. The key object has existed in Illustrator for several versions, but it is new to InDesign. Let me find my key object. Ah, there it is. It's the one that's highlighted. But how do I choose another object as my key object? All I have to do is click on that object, and you can see now that object is highlighted. And now if I click on the Distribute Vertical Space command, the key object remains where it is, and all of the other objects move towards it until they were 0.25 inches apart. But what about some of the other choices under the Align To pop-up menu? I'm going to choose Align to Margins, but there's also Align to Page and Align to Spread. They all work pretty much the same way. It's aligning to part of your page or spread. I'm going to choose Margins, and I'm going to click off of my selection and just click on that top object on the left. I'm going to use a couple of commands to center this object within my margins. If I click on Align Horizontal Centers, it's going to make the center of the object centered between the two vertical margins. And then I'm going to click on Align Vertical Centers, and it's going to align the object perfectly so that it's centered in my margins. There's a lot you can do with the Align panel to align objects to each other and to your page. We're going to continue talking about working with frames and objects in the next lesson.